Hey guys, this is Don, BluefirePoker.com. Today I'm going to be making a video, live commentary again, basically trying to develop reads. So I'm only going to play one table and really break down like the table composition. I've had the table up for a little bit, so I have approximately 50 to 60 hands on each player. In addition to that, I'm going to kind of develop reads on the players, how I want to have like a general plan of attack, and walk you guys through my thought processes. So I want to talk a little bit about each player. Okay, starting with the player to my left. He's gonna be pretty okay. So here are his HUD stats. David OK. He's playing 43% of hands, which is unbelievably loose, and raising about 16% of them. So raising 16% of hands is fairly, standard. Playing half your hands is not, however. In addition to that, he only steals about, 10% of hands, so he's not going to be positionally aware. He's going to be raising about an equal amount from each positions, and it's not going to taper towards the button in raising more. So like our immediate assumption is he's not going to be that great of a player, and if he turns out to be, then we'll adjust accordingly. So when I do find a player that I think is going to be pretty bad, what I do is I color code them. Like the fish or bad players, I mark as purple, and this will show up in the lobby when you scroll through, based on the color coding on each table. So that'll be particularly useful. Okay, so the player to his left. Okay, so let me talk about this hand really quick. I just threw at him the hand before, so pocket tens. When he opens from the cutoff, it's going to be pretty standard. And I think he expects me to c-bet here quite a bit. And this board doesn't hit me very often, so he's pretty prone to play back at me, I'd say. Like I murder the board there, he's not going to have all that much very often. So I don't think checking is all that bad. Kind of trying to represent ace king, ace queen, something like that, so we can start firing the turn. Given that I did 3-bet him 2 hands in a row, and the fact that I think he is a little bit more prone to play back at me at that point, I'd rather just opt to c-bet and hope he continues with like pocket sevens, pocket eights, ace high, or kind of check raises me on a pretty dry board. Okay, so the player to his left, Turkey Mo, is going to be a nit basically. Positionally aware one at that. So he's playing 12% of hands and raising 11%, which is really tight. Like the standard tag is going to be 1816 or 2018. So this player is very, very good to have to our left because we're going to be able to open up all of our buttons against his big blind. So at this point, my plan, when it is my button, is to basically open 100% of hands because Turkey Mother is not going to play back at me, and well, I mean, he's not going to play back at me without a legitimate hand. So his hand will typically be face up, and David OK will be calling a ton out of position. And since I immediately think that he's not going to be, the greatest player, him playing out of position to me a majority of the time is going to be really beneficial. So my button is going to be particularly powerful at this table because I get to play against a weaker player in position every time I am in position. Okay, so the next player, Waterfall, seems, decentish. 1814 is going to be like standard tag, and he is like stealing from the cutoff and button about 33%. So both Waterfall and Turkey Mother are going to be positionally aware, indicating that they have slightly better fundamentals than some of the other players. Like Turkey Mother, even though he only raises 10% of hands, a majority of his raising here is going to be from late position, as you can see, because he's raising about 27% when it's folded to him in the cutoff and button. Okay, so Waterfall is, he looks like a decent player for 50 NL, so I would probably rather opt to not play as many pots as I could with him and kind of play straightforward against him. Dub the Boss is new to the table, so we are readless here. And Frankie Jr. 25-19. He's stealing at about half his hands, so he's going to be pretty loose, very aggressive, and we have position on him, which is going to be a huge advantage for us, and it's going to be very disadvantage for him because we'll be able to 3-bet him quite a bit, play all our pots in position against the loose player. So this is a pretty good table in that, you know, I have a type player to my left over here, the loosest, most aggressive player to my right, which is always beneficial. So Dub the Boss, he bought in for 40 big blinds, typically indicating a pretty weak player, and he's limped the first two. So, I mean, almost certainly he's going to be kind of fishy. So I'll mark him, and if he shows me otherwise, then I'll remove that. And I'm basically going to look to isolate this player and play tons of pots in position against him, expect him to play relatively straightforward post-flop. So on a really dry board texture of 4-4 deuce, that really misses his range, I don't need to bet all that much, right? So I'm only going to bet about a little bit over half pot here. Like some players have a standardized bet and just bet 350 there, regardless of board texture. But on a 4-4 deuce board, you know, he's not going to have much. So we don't need to bet all that much, because if we bet 350 as opposed to 250, we're risking an extra 2 big blinds every time he does have like pocket sixes, pocket sevens. And if his folding range and calling range are basically the same regardless of our bet size, we should opt for the smaller bet in that spot in order to maximize our win rate, because we just want to bet the minimum amount it takes for him to fold on that flop. So I'd opt for about half pot there in general. So David OK left, which is a little bit unfortunate because he was a pretty good spot at this table. If this folds around to me, like I said, Turkey Mother is going to be really tight here, and I don't need to risk that much either. So sometimes I make it 4x from the small blind when I steal from the small blind in blind battles, but against a player that's playing 12-11, he's basically looking to play, you know, very straightforwardly, top 10% of hands type thing. So I can make it 3x there and have it be as effective as 4x. So I have a decision here. I expect Frankie to be isolating pretty wide. I'm going to give him this one. A lot of times in this spot, since his range is going to be pretty wide because Dub the Boss is limping, Frankie Jr. Is aggressive, as we can see. He steals about 44% of hands. He's going to be isolating here with a really wide range. And anytime someone has a very weak and wide range, we can attack that by 3-betting there, and there's not much you can do about it because his range is way too wide and he's going to have to fold there way too often. Given that I had like a marginal hand, one that I think it's a spot where I do 3-bet there a lot, I opted not to because I have 3-bet him twice in the last 10 or so hands and won both pots. So I mean, even though I think it's a plus EV spot in general, you kind of want to consider, the way the game has been playing before making your decision. So if I hadn't 3-bet him twice in those other two pots, I would certainly 3-bet him there. Raw Hog, again, an unknown. I immediately assume he's going to be a fish, simply based on the fact that he posted out of position. I don't think I've ever seen a reg or someone solid do that. So I'd mark him as purple, and that'll show up in the lobbies, whatnot. So when I'm scanning through, Frankie Jr. I think is going to be a decent reg, so I'd just mark him orange. That's my color coding for solid reg until I saw otherwise. And then that'll show up. So here, let me bring up the lobby. Um, as you can see, like when you're going through, like 50 NL, I haven't played in a little bit, so they're not going to be color coded. But you can scan through the lobby and see the way it's color coded. So if you see like a lot of purple, which is what I characterize fish to be at a table, then you kind of want to jump on those wait lists. If you see a table full of regs, you stay away. So that's a huge benefit in full tilt with the color coding. So our assumption about Dub the Boss thus far has been true, to say the least. He hasn't raised a single hand. He's played about a quarter of them, all very much passively. So he's pretty much going to whittle away unless he makes some really strong hands, because he's going to be playing too many pots without initiative and relying way too much on making hands. Raw Hog, min raises under the gun. I think it's an okay call here. I'm not thrilled about it, but I have suited connector, and he snap checks. The ace kind of hits a lot of his range there when he does check back, so I'm going to check and decide. He snap checks again, so he likely has air here, and there's really no reason to bet if he does have air a lot of the time. So I'm definitely going to want to make a note about that. It's annoying. So that information is going to be really useful. Like in that particular hand, we actually had a pair in moderate showdown value, so there really was no reason to bet and force him off his hand. But in the future, when we see him snap check the flop like that, we make the immediate assumption that he probably has air in that spot, and we can bet all of our air and win those pots uncontested. So he's kind of giving off timing tells, and that's something we want to look for in players, and make a note of it, because they'll really give their hand strength away a lot. One second. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to be opening up probably 100% of my buttons against Turkey Mother until he starts 3-betting me or starts defending. And that's certainly a flaw, right? If I can just open up 100% of my hands from the button and this player doesn't exploit me because my range is basically going to be ridiculously wide, then he has a small leak in his game and isn't really adjusting, which is to my benefit. If he were adjusting correctly, he'd start 3-betting there, start defending a little bit more, forcing me to stop opening up like every button. So far I think I've opened up every button when it was folded around to me, and he has just had the check fold button off. So he could potentially be playing a lot of tables, or is relatively new and just playing tight, which is fine. But if you see players that are playing 11-9, or like 10-8, you kind of just want to win all the small pots against them and kind of let them win the big pots, because they basically always have the goods. Like when he 3-bets here, he certainly is going to have tens plus, ace queen plus every time, I'd say. So if Dub the Boss was thinking at all, he wouldn't call with speculative hands given his stack sizes. He was playing 40 big blinds effective. He's calling off half his stack there, and folding on that flop. So Dub the Boss really needs to continue with a really, really strong range given stack sizes, given that Turkey Mother himself has a very, very strong hand on average there, and there's not much we can do about it if we only have 40 big blinds. We can't call with the suited connector or small pair and try to outflop him because we don't have the implied odds. So Dub the Boss is certainly going to be, as we expected, a pretty weak player. Okay, so Rawhawk snap checked last time, and he snap checks again. So this is going to be a spot we're going to steal this pot a lot of time because Rawhawk is going to have air, as we suspect. So those are those small pots, although you're only winning a couple big blinds, really add up. If you're playing on a ton of tables and not really paying attention to the player tendencies and the game dynamics, you're going to miss out on a lot of spots where you could win with, really weak hands. So be very, very aware. I mean, I'm guilty of it sometimes too. Like, I'll have a bunch of tables, or I'll be reading 2+2 around aim at the same time, and I kind of miss a lot of spots when I'm not playing my best. But certainly, if I'm playing pretty well, I'll be able to identify a lot of spots in which players won't be winning pots, or in which regs won't be identifying spots in which they can win when they have fairly weak holdings, and that's going to be the difference in your win rate, right? So if most regs play spots the same, the way you're going to have a higher win rate than them is doing stuff different, and that's mainly going to be by identifying situations in which other people won't realize. So if we're playing 10 tables and we just see Rawhog checking down, but we can't focus on him, snap checking and equating that to be air, then we're going to miss out on a lot of profitable situations. Like, I'm not going to be isolating DragTheBar here. He limped again, but given that he had a $7 stack, 14 big blinds, like at that point I can't isolate wide anymore. I basically need a strong hand because he's going to do stuff like that. He's going to be raising all in a ton on the turn. So definitely a spot in which you can't really continue with the weak holding. Even though we do want to isolate him a lot, we can't isolate him that wide when the effective stacks were 14 big blinds. So even though this is something else we want to note right here. So Turkey Mother, even though he only raises 10% of hands, look at his position, right? He's on the button, and a weak player has limped in the cutoff. So basically, even though we say, okay, he usually only raises strong hands, he's probably going to be isolating here 30-35% of hands. So he's going to have a much more normal, I guess, range here, and it won't be strictly strong hands. So that's something else we want to pay attention to. Even though the HUD stats here say he only raises 10% of hands, identify the situation. If a weak player limps in the cutoff and he steals quite a bit from the button, he isolates here, that's a spot in which we could 3-bet him from waterfall spot quite a bit. So DragTheBar called there with King Jack, King High, probably not owning play. He's calling to chop there. Turkey Mother's basically never bluffing there. Really, really awful call. So Turkey Mother in that particular hand did have Ace Queen, which is very legitimate and very standard steal when Rawhog limped, but I do suspect that he will be doing that fairly late. I'm just going to fold here because DragTheBar has 8 big blinds behind, and my hand won't have the implied odds it needs given his stack size, so I'm not going to be completing there with 3 high. There's basically not much you can do when someone open shoves. You need a hand, and you fold, 80% of the time there. So this type of player is going to be really profitable to have at your table. Kind of buys in $20, loses half a stack, and then kind of goes between $5 and $10 and starts open shoving, and that's certainly going to be a profitable situation for you. And I often see a table full of regs, and I just don't get it. Like, people just kind of jump on a bunch of tables and don't leave them when the tables get bad. Like, this table is probably going to be pretty profitable for me based on Dub the Boss and Raw Hog, but I have seen tables with like 6 regs kind of trading money back and forth, and it's basically a waste of time and a situation in which there's very little edge. You're going to be, in higher variance situations, and can lead to tilt, bad play, etc. Um, Playing here where, players basically open shoving or shoving 3x pot is going to be a much more lucrative situation for us, in which we probably won't tilt very often because we won't be losing at this table very often. And is the type of table that we want to identify when we do sit down. Frankie Jr., I'd like to talk about what aggressiveness does early in a match. So when I first sat down, I believe I 3-bet Frankie 2 times pretty quickly from the get-go, and that's why it's really, really slowed him down in opening when I was in the blinds or in blind battles. So I think they were certainly both plus EV. Turkey Mother plays back here. I'm not really sure if it's because he has a hand or if it's because I've opened almost every single one of my buttons, but I'm definitely giving it up with King High. So Frankie Jr., since then, even though at the beginning we saw that he liked to open up or steal 45% of the hands, has really kind of backed off quite a bit because he fears that we're going to be 3-betting a lot of the time. So that really opened up a lot of profit in walks and being able to steal other pots later in the match. So the early aggression has certainly paid off here. Score Big Yo 21, sits down, 40 big blind stack. That's almost, I'd say, like 85% of the time going to be a pretty weak player. Again, we get a walk, like I said. Frankie basically, I think, has decided not to try to steal all the pots from us because he thinks we're going to run him over a bit. So that's good for us. But Score Big Yo 21 sits down, and we kind of want to immediately assess the situation. He buys 40 big blinds. It's kind of the mark of a weakish player, but he didn't auto post, so he's probably not going to be a huge fish. And then we'll kind of wait to see how he plays before we make any judgments about him. Queen 10 is going to be open from the cutoff at most tables, particularly this one. Raw Hog will be calling here, a fair amount in position, but I'm fairly confident that I have enough post-flop skills to outmaneuver him post-flop, even though he has positional advantage against me. And the blinds in that case were pretty tight, Turkey Mother playing 11% of hands, Waterfall playing 16% of hands, so I expect that steal to be pretty profitable. Ace 10 is the type of hand where it's kind of marginal, but the 2 players behind me, Turkey Mother and Waterfall, are tight, so they won't be 3-betting me all that often, and they won't be flatting that often. So this is a spot where if Turkey Mother and Waterfall, either of them were 3-bet happy or pretty good, and we're gonna flat me and play well against me in position, then I'd fold Ace 10 there from first position, given how tight they are, and I think it's going to be a much more profitable open. And that's something that players really need to work on. It's identifying the table composition to see what hands you can open. If tight players are behind you, you can open up a lot more hands and not really just follow like a strict guideline. If there are loose players behind you, you might not want to open up a hand like Ace 10. So flop top pair here. Frankie Jr. so far has been c-betting 80% of the time. He checks to me. And it's going to be a pretty standard bet here with my entire range. When players open small blind and then check flop, it's usually with the intention of check folding. So even if I didn't have top pair there, I'm pretty comfortable betting that flop and taking it down the majority of the time. Like I was saying about what hands you want to open, what type of hands you want to open. So far I've been playing the loosest at this table, and that's 33% of my hands, raising a quarter of them. So I'm going to isolate score big yo. He's probably going to be pretty weak if he's buying in 40 big blinds and then open limping. On this particular flop, if he doesn't limp ace X and call a raise, it's going to be pretty difficult for him to continue here. So I'm going to make a small raise and expect him to play fit or fold. So I'm going to make it slightly under 3x in addition to his raise, just because my hand won't show down all that well. Sometimes he's leading 5x there, 7x, and like pocket sixes, just kind of feel it out. And I really don't want him to win with those hands. So at this point, I'm done. I have about 2/3 pot left, and I don't want to get it in, because if he's calling that flop bet, he certainly has ace X or 7x, and the 5 isn't going to change much. It probably increases the likeliness that he's going to call a shove there. So I'm basically going to shut down on this hand. Okay, so I made that note because I basically want to get an idea of what his leading range is, right? If he's going to be limping hands like that and I'm going to have position on him, then I'm going to be isolating him a lot. And at this point, my early assumption is, because I've only seen him lead once, is that his leading range potentially may be strong, or strongish, like top pair is pretty strong, and not air. So a lot of players that lead into the preflop raiser may have strong hands, they may have weaker hands on average, and my early read and assumption on score big yo is that it's going to be stronger until I see otherwise. So if he leads in the future, I'd probably give him a little bit more credit. Oh, but like I was saying, so I'm playing 33% of my hands, raising 25% of them, which is, pretty loose. And the reason that I'm able to play this loose, and I think it's profitable to do so, is because the players are tight behind me. So I've kind of watched other videos and talked to other players where they kind of just basically play 20% of their hands, raise 18% of their hands, and follow a really strict guideline of what hands they open from each position, which is fine. I mean, if you play a bunch of tables, then it's going to be difficult to adjust to the table dynamics and whatnot. So, but I mean, this number should really, really change quite a bit based on each table. You shouldn't just be playing 20% of hands, raising 18% of them on every table, because you should be playing different at each table because each table would be different, right? So at a really, really loose table where there's a bunch of calling stations and people that just don't hate the fold button, I'd probably be playing like 2018 rather than 34-26. So he leads half pot again. My hand ranks to be best a lot if he, depending on his limp calling range. So I'm going to peel one and kind of see what he does on the turn. And even if the call was slightly neg AV, I really want this to get to showdown so I can see what he has, see what he's going to be limping with. So he's going to be leading pretty wide here. He led ace 8. And he led top pair. So even if the call on the flop was, slightly loose, slightly losing, I don't mind it because he's going to be limping a ton, it looks like. He's so far limped. Or he's been playing about 40% of his hands, and I'm going to be isolating him a lot. So I really need to identify what his range is going to be early if we're going to play any significant amount of hands together, because if it gets a showdown, I'll be able to use information much better than he will. So I really wanted to call that flop and try to get to a cheap showdown there. And I think ace high is going to be the best hand a fair amount of the time. Seven eight suited is a hand I like to play. I'm out of position the rest of the way. Calling here invites Nestori to call. In addition to that, both players are playing about from 40 big blind stacks to 50 big blind stacks, so I really don't have the implied odds there to call with 7-8 suited, so that's certainly going to be a fold. Again, Turkey Mother is really tight. I'm just going to open up all my buttons. And I think he had the check fold button going, so stealing from that spot is, like I thought it would be, going to be very, very profitable for me. I have King 9-6. Waterfall is pretty tight, and the board is pretty dry. But he's been playing relatively fit or fold on the flop, so I don't think there's much value in betting my second pair for value here, because he's going to fold all of his air and continue with better nines, pocket tens, king X. I pick up a gutter on the turn in addition to my pair, so I'm certainly going to call here, especially since I check back the flop. A lot of players just lead there with their entire range and then kind of revalue it on the river. Certainly going to check. I'm not going to bluff him off any kings or any tens. He's checking with the intention of calling if he does have those hands, and nothing worse is going to call, so it's going to be easy check back. He played that hand fine. Like, defending pre-flop is certainly going to be very reasonable, and leading turn is also going to be reasonable, in that, when I check back this flop, I almost never have king X, or my perceived range won't have king X all that often when I check back the flop, because I'm certainly betting those for value. Given that he can lead the turn for value and possibly the river too, the check is fine on the river because not much worse calls. Like, I'll show up with worse tens there. I'll also show up with 9x like I had, but it's going to be a little thin to bet there, and checking or betting is going to be fine. And on this ace 8-5 board, since I was the pre-flop raiser against these two players. I very much so have ace X in my range, and they're gonna play, I think, fit or fold on this flop and fold out, any eight, any five, pocket sevens, pocket sixes. I don't have a club. I don't have all that much showdown value, so I kind of just want to make a bet here, and it only needs to work a third of the time against both players. So I lay myself a pretty good price by stabbing at that pot. Turkey Mother here opens from first position, and like I said, his steal has gone down a little bit, but when he raises from this spot, it's gonna be 8% of hands about. So, huh. So Nestori really needs a really strong hand here because Turkey Mother, I mean, he folds, but Turkey Mother is gonna have Ace Jack plus there and probably pocket nines plus. So he's gonna have a really really strong range when he opens from that position. Something that we certainly want to identify and something we want to know. Not just Turkey Mother open, he's going to be tight. We want to say, okay, he opened from first position, it's going to be tighter than what he opens on average. Score Big Yo, limps again. I'm going to continue isolating with a really wide range. Expect it to be profitable. Huh, he limp re-raises me, which is interesting. It's kind of tough. I'm probably going to fold. Like, Ace 10 isn't really strong enough to continue here, I think. He really expected me to bet there in the spot, too, because I've been doing it every time. So, I mean, it's perfectly reasonable for him to limp, like, pocket jacks plus, ace queen plus, and then limp re-raise me. And if he is doing it with that particular range, ace 10 is doing very, very poorly against it. So, I mean, I think I have to fold there. I'm trying to think about what hands I'd continue with there, given stack sizes and given that he limp re-raised. And I think I would probably go with, like, I'd call with pocket nines through pocket jacks and probably go with queens plus and ace king. But it's certainly going to be close because, like, you shouldn't assume. Okay, so when people limp re-raise, it's basically inferred that they have a very very strong hand, right? And we shouldn't make like any quick assumptions just because we've been kind of running them over a little bit that maybe they're playing back at us. I would just go ahead and say at this point, at least this early, that he probably has queens or better, and not try to read too much into it that okay, maybe he's playing back at me because I'm kind of running him over in this spot and he's adjusting his ranges. Basically just go with the standardized thought of okay, he probably has a really strong hand until you see him do it like multiple times where the frequencies change, and you don't want to out level yourself into saying, okay, so he limp re-raised me after I've isolated him 4 times in a row. He's probably doing this with air, when in fact he probably had a strong hand. And I wouldn't like make another play back in him with ace 10 there. I think it's probably going to be a losing play. Most of your plays should be relatively straightforward anyway, particularly at 50 NL and below. There's no reason to go out of your way to make these high variance plays when like so far in this match I haven't really overextended myself all that much. I've kind of, won a lot of the small pots and have really avoided playing any big pots without decent cards, and I think that's going to be a more optimal way to play, right? Because I haven't gone to showdown all that often, and have won almost half a buy-in when within about 100 hands, and that's certainly not going to be a reasonable win rate, but it's certainly a style I advocate I don't really play huge pots that often. I mean, I will certainly play big pots, but I'd rather just kind of beat up on all the small pots and identify situations in which I can win the pot rather than overextend myself and kind of make guesses in the big pots and play high variance poker. Uh, like again, I really don't know. Turkey Mo's been really tight so far, but at this point, people could be adjusting to how loose I've been, in that um, I'm basically stealing in all the steal spots, and I've been isolating in all the spots where I could isolate. So they could potentially just pick up a hand there, or um, very reasonably just start playing back at me because I'm so loose. So at this point, I'm going to really tighten my ranges, and I won't be isolating too light. Um, 9-6 deuce is like a good board to C bet, but not into three other players, and I don't expect it to show a profit. So I'm just going to check fold at some point here. But anyway, so far, like I just got limp re-raise, I just isolated, got 3-bet. It's quite possible that people are playing back at me. Like if you look at my stats, I'm playing 37-31, stealing 60% of the time, and 3-betting 12%, which is, or 11%, which is reasonably high. And other people are going to realize this, especially this far into the match. And at that point, you want to adjust your ranges. Like I said early in the match, it was really, really profitable to play in this style. Really, really loose because the table is so tight, and I could pick up many, many pots. But since it seems like people are going to play back at me with a slightly wider range, I think it's going to be reasonable for me to it's going to be reasonable for me to adjust and play a lot tighter in each spot where they expect my range to be really, really loose, and at this point, my range is going to be really tight, and I expect that to show a profit. Waterfall 21 there. Um, Bet the turn with a gutter and flush draw, which is entirely reasonable, and gets called by a score big yo. So score big yo here could have 8-10, which will fold. Queen Jack or Queen 10 just got there. It's going to be pretty difficult for Jack X to fold, and maybe a pair of nines. And that's a spot where, like I said, I'm not gonna, like Score Big Yo is going to be not the greatest player, and I wouldn't overextend myself and make a $15 bluff there, because you don't know. Like I make it kind of a rule of thumb not to bluff bad players, because there really is no reason to. They're going to make a lot of mistakes on their own, and you kind of value town them a lot and win a lot of the small pots, or win the big pots when you have something. That's basically my strategy against bad players. So I wouldn't go and make a big 2-barrel bluff against a slightly worse player there. I mean, it's certainly fine. It might be plus EV, but it's not really a something that I'd advocate. Like Queen 6 suited still an open for me from the button. And I said I was going to tighten up, but the hand is a little bit too strong. Ace 8 is certainly a hand I might fold from the cutoff. And I said I'd tighten my ranges. Normally, early in the match, Ace 8 is a hand I'd open, at 100% frequency from there. But since people have been playing up back a little bit, I'm going to tighten up from that spot and other spots as well. So I'll play out the rest of my hands to my big blind and call it a video. In a lot of my other videos, I didn't play that loose. Like, I'm playing really, really loose here, and I thought the table warranted it. So, as you start improving and identifying spots in which you could steal pots, and identifying spots in which are profitable steal situations, you can start playing a little bit looser. Sucks. But the thing I really wanted to hammer home in this video is that you shouldn't necessarily just play 2018 or 1618 at every table. And I think that's pretty much the standard for most regs. They don't adjust their ranges based on the table, and that's going to be a much more profitable way to play poker. You kind of don't want to be a robot, I guess, and just do the same thing regardless of the players at your table. You want to adjust. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is Nguyen, otherwise known as SoCalQuest with BluefirePoker.com, signing off. Have a good one.